The station had no official name. Personnel called it Kero, a word that meant nothing in any language on record, which was exactly why the crew of 43 had chosen it. Things without names were harder to mourn. Out here, at the rim where the galaxy spiral arm fanned into empty darkness, like the burned edge of old paper. Mourning was effortless if one allowed it. Dr. Lena Marsh stood at the observation panel on the eastern corridor, watching the gas cloud they called a veil shift colors the way old bruises do. Purple bleeding into yellow, and yellow into a sick, exhausted gray. She had been at Kero for 14 months. Before that, she had been a grief counselor at a hospital in Columbus, Ohio. Before that, she had been a daughter. She was 38 years old. She had brown hair she never remembered to cut, and a habit of pressing her thumb into her opposite palm when she was thinking. She was not a soldier. She was not a diplomat. She was a station's continuity specialist, the person responsible for maintaining human psychological stability in long-duration isolation postings. In plain terms, she kept people from falling apart. Kero existed because of a treaty. 7 years prior, Earth had contacted a civilization called the Dravari, not through radio signals or light pulses, but through collision. A Dravari survey vessel had clipped a human deep-range probe near the Veil. The resulting diplomatic scramble had lasted 2 years and produced, eventually, an agreement. A joint observation station positioned at the boundary of Dravari territorial space and the unmapped region beyond, staffed by both species, monitoring what lived in the dark past Veil. What lived there had no name yet, either. Kero's human crew shared the station with 11 Dravari. The Dravari were tall, almost 3 meters, and built narrow, like something that had evolved to move between tall trees. Their skin was a deep, matte charcoal, and it shifted texture constantly, going smooth when they were calm and rising into small ridge patterns when they were agitated. They had no visible eyes. They navigated through resonance perception, a biological system that read the vibration of objects, air, fluid, and living tissue with extraordinary precision. According to Dravari, a silent room was actually deafeningly loud. To them, the station hummed with the heartbeats of every person inside it. Lena had spent 3 months learning to understand their communication, which occurred through a combination of low-frequency chest pulses and a clicking secondary tongue that most human ears needed an interpreter to decode. She had gotten good enough to hold slow, careful conversations. She had become proficient enough to understand that the Dravari crew was also not entirely at ease in this environment. Their science lead, a Dravari she called Sev, had told her once, through the interpreter, while she sat across from him in the shared mess hall at 0300 when neither of them could sleep, that as people believed isolation was the body's way of preparing itself to stop existing. He had not said this as a complaint. He had said it as a fact of biology. The way a human might say the heart slows when you are cold, Lena had written it in her notes. She had also written below it, "He is lonely." Different word, same shape. Tonight, she was watching the Veil because it had changed. For 11 months, the gas cloud had pulsed on a rhythm they had all grown used to, a slow, 6-hour cycle of expansion and contraction, like something enormous breathing. 3 days ago, the breathing had stopped. The cloud sat still, dense, patient. She pressed her thumb into her palm. Behind her, she heard the click of boots on the corridor floor. Human boots, the heavy magnetic kind they wore in the low-gravity eastern wing. "You see it too," said the voice. She did not turn. She knew the voice. Commander Dale Okafor, station chief and former deep-range navigation officer, possessed a peculiar stillness of someone who had made peace with every dangerous thing and simply waited to meet it. "It's been still for 71 hours, Lena said. 72 as of 4 minutes ago. He came to stand beside her. He was carrying 2 cups of the terrible instant coffee that was all they had left until the next supply rotation. He handed her one. She took it. Sev's team picked up something on a resonance array an hour ago. Woke him up. "What kind of something?" Dale looked at the Veil. "Structured," he said. "Whatever's in there isn't breathing, because it's not sleeping anymore." Lena wrapped both hands around the cup. The Veil pulsed once, a single massive contraction, and then, slowly, began to open. They had protocols for contact. They had 17 different contact protocols. Actually, developed over 4 years by a joint human-Dervari committee and refined in 6 simulation exercises. The protocols covered passive observation, active response, emergency evacuation, communication attempts, territorial breach, and 8 other categories of possible encounters. None of the protocols covered what came through the veil, which included unidentified entities and phenomena that pose unique challenges not addressed by the existing protocols. It was not a ship, or it was not only a ship. The object that emerged from the collapsing cloud moved the way a school of fish moves, as individual units that were also unmistakably one thing. 317 separate vessels, each roughly the size of a transit shuttle, arranged in a formation that shifted continuously, expanding, contracting, rotating, but never broke apart. The formation pulsed with a rhythm. The rhythm was not the familiar, slow-breathing rhythm of the veil. Something faster. To the humans observing from a sensor array, the rhythm felt uncomfortably similar to a heartbeat. Lena stood in the observation room with 12 other crew members and watched in silence. Seth stood in the corner. His skin had gone completely smooth, the Dervari expression of total internal stillness. Later, Lena would learn that the man was not calm. This was what Dervari looked like when they were afraid. "Have you encountered them before?" Dale asked him quietly. Seth's secondary tongue clicked for a long moment. The interpreter rendered it. "We have encountered their borders. We did not cross them. This is the first time they have crossed ours. Do they have a name? We call them the Orrenti. The word in your language would be the ones who remain. Remain where? Everywhere they have ever been. They do not leave places. They accumulate." The formation outside began to slow. It oriented. The entire 300-vessel body rotating as a single unit until its leading edge faced Kero directly. Then it stopped moving. I simply looked at them. The station's communication array registered a signal 17 seconds later. Not radio, not light. The signal came to the hull itself. A vibration so precisely structured that it could only be intentional, traveling through every surface of Kero simultaneously, and felt by every human on board not with their ears, but in their chests, in their teeth, in the fluid behind their eyes. It lasted 4 seconds. Then silence. Seb made a sound Lena had never heard from a Dervari before. A high, thin tone through his primary resonance chamber that the interpreter could not process. He pressed both of his broad, forefinger hands flat against the floor and held still. "What do they say?" Dale asked. The interpreter struggled. Then, "The Orrenti do not use language the way we understand it. What they transmitted was a statement of presence, a claim. In Dervari terms, the closest equivalent would be, we were here before you named this place, and we will be here when your name for it is gone. But that is not quite right. It is more like, they are informing us that our presence here is a condition they are choosing for now to permit." "That's not a greeting," said Lieutenant Commander Sarah Voss, their tactical officer, from across the room. "That's a notice." Lena had not said anything yet. She was watching the formation outside, the way it pulsed, the rhythm. "It matches," she said quietly. Everyone looked at her. She pointed at the sensor readout on the secondary screen, the one showing the formation's pulse frequency. Then she pulled up the station's internal environmental data. The ventilation cycle. The station's gravity ring began to rotate. The Orrenti formation, a structure within the station, was pulsing in perfect synchrony with Kero's own mechanical heartbeat, which refers to the rhythmic operation of Kero's internal systems. They had been listening to the station for a long time before they arrived. The Orrenti did not attack on the first day, or the second. They held their position. 300 vessels, barely 4 kilometers from the station's outer hull, and they pulsed. Every 6 hours, they transmitted another hull vibration signal. Each one lasted exactly 4 seconds. Each one felt different in the body. One pressed behind the sternum like grief, one rattled the back teeth like fear, and one sat in the sinuses like the moment before a person starts crying and hasn't admitted it yet. Lena recorded all of them, lying on her bunk in the darkness. She listened to the recordings using bone conduction headphones, attempting to comprehend the messages conveyed. The crew was not doing well. This was her job to notice and her job to manage. and she watched the signs spread through the station the way she had once watched infection markers climb a patient chart. Loss of appetite, disrupted sleep. The mess hall and the equipment bays experienced a spike in irritability. 3 crew members requested transfer in the first 48 hours. Dale denied the request gently, explained they had no outbound transport, and sent them to Lena. She sat with all 3 of them. She listened. She told them the truth, because she had learned long ago that pretending safety to frighten people only taught them that their fear was a problem rather than a response. What she said instead was, "Your nervous system is doing exactly what it was built to do. That's not weakness. That's information." The 3rd crew member, a young propulsion tech named Marcus Webb, 24 years old from Tulsa, who kept a photograph of his dog taped to his bunk wall, looked at her after she said these words and said, "But what do we do with information?" She did not have an answer yet. She went to see Sev. She found him in the Dravari section of the station, in the resonance chamber, a room the Dravari crew had lined with their materials, dense fabric-like sheets that absorbed and reflected vibration in specific patterns. It was, Lena understood, the Dravari equivalent of a quiet room. She knocked on the frame, a thing she had learned Sev appreciated, because most humans simply entered. He was sitting cross-legged on the floor, which surprised her. The Dravari rarely sat. He was pressing his palms flat on the ground the same way he had during the first signal. "Is this a bad time?" She asked through the interpreter that she have her collar clipped. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "There is no good time. Please come in." She sat across from him. "You're listening to them," she said. "I cannot stop. Their signal travels constantly through the hull. There's a base layer transmission beneath the 6-hour pulses that does not stop. Most of your crew cannot perceive it. My people can hear it continuously." What does it say? It is not language. It is closer to atmospheric pressure. You know the feeling when a weather system is approaching and the air changes? Is there ever a moment when your body senses something before your mind does? Yes, it is that. Sustained. For 4 days now. Lena pressed her thumb into her palm. "That's what's affecting my crew. They can't hear it consciously, but they feel it." "Yes." "Sev, is this an attack?" He was quiet for a long time. His skin shifted, ridge patterns rising and falling. In Dravari history, we have a record of the Orrenti doing this to 2 other civilizations, applying presence. Pressure, not weapons, not demands. Just wait. What happened to those civilizations? The first one left. The first civilization left their territory at the border and retreated. The Orrenti accumulated that space. The second one attempted a military response. They sent vessels into the formation. The formation did not fight back. Then what? It simply closed. The vessels were inside the formation, and then the formation was, ho, and the vessels were gone. Lena sat with that for a moment. "And Earth," she said carefully. "Have the Orrenti ever encountered humans before?" "No. You are new. We are all new to them. But I think," he paused. His skin went flat and smooth again. "I think they are curious about you specifically. The base layer transmission changed when your crew began moving through the station differently. It changed again when you began recording their signals. They notice. Everything they do is noticed. It is the only thing they do." Lena stood. She walked to the door. Then she stopped. "It's the second civilization," she said. "The one that sent ships in. Did they know the formation would close?" "I do not believe so." "Did the Orrenti warn them?" Sev's secondary tongue clicked once, slowly. They transmitted for 6 days first. The same 4-second pulses. The same base layer pressure. The civilization did not understand the language, and so they believed there was no communication happening. But there is always communication happening. The question is only whether both parties know how to listen. Lena walked back to her station. She did not sleep. She sat in her cabin with the bone conduction headphones and the recordings and a blank document on her screen, and she began to write, not a report, not a protocol, a translation. On the 5th day, the Orrenti changed their signal. The 6-hour pulses stopped. In their place was one continuous transmission, low and slow, lasting 11 hours. which the entire crew felt but could not name. Lena described it in her notes as the feeling of being watched by something that has been observing you long enough to lose interest in hiding its presence. Dale sent the emergency relay to Earth. He had sent standard reports daily. This was different. This flag meant we needed a decision from someone with authority. The relay took 6 hours to reach the nearest deep-range communications buoy. The response took another 9. Lena was in the observation room when it arrived. Dale read it twice alone before calling the senior staff together. He read it aloud. Earth's response was not military orders. It was not an evacuation directive. It was not a threat assessment protocol. It was a name. Dr. James Osei, 61 years old, professor of acoustic anthropology at the University of Cape Town, and for the past 9 years, the lead researcher on Earth's Nonverbal Communication Project, a program dedicated to the study of how meaning travels through physical sensation rather than language. Pressure, vibration, rhythm, touch. He was already en route. A swift courier vessel. Estimated arrival, 31 hours. "They're sending a professor," said Sarah Voss flatly. "They're sending the right person," Lena said. Sarah looked at her. "You know him?" "I know his work." She paused. He spent 6 years sitting in complete silence with communities that communicated exclusively through physical contact. He learned to understand what people meant not through words, but through the pressure and timing of a hand placed on his shoulder. She looked at the formation outside. He knows how to listen to things that don't use language. He's still just one man. So is every other choice we have. The Orrenti's continuous transmission shifted slightly during the conversation. The shift was too slight for a human to consciously register. Lena did not know the information yet. She would learn it later. What the Dravari resonance array recorded during those 11 hours was this. The base layer transmission had begun, slowly, to include something new, a counter rhythm, a secondary pulse, running beneath the primary one, matched not the frequency of the station's mechanical systems, but the collective resting heart rate of the human crew. The Orrenti had stopped listening to the station. They had started listening to the people inside it, focusing on their emotions, thoughts, and the subtle cues that indicated their well-being and concerns. The courier arrived in 28. James Osei was shorter than Lena expected, compact, gray-haired, with a kind of face that had done a great deal of careful looking and showed it. He wore no uniform. He carried 2 bags, one of equipment, and one that clinked when he set it down and turned out to contain, inexplicably, 8 glass jars of honey. "For the crew," he said, when Lena raised an eyebrow. "Sugar stabilizes the nervous system under chronic low-grade stress. The kind you can't consciously identify." She decided immediately that she liked him. He spent the first 2 hours walking every corridor of the station in silence, touching the walls. He walked slowly, his palm flat against the walls. He did these actions without explanation, and the crew watched him with an uncertainty that eventually settled into a kind of quiet respect. The way people quiet themselves around someone who is very clearly doing something important that they don't yet understand. Then he went to the resonance chamber and spent 3 hours with Sev. Lena was not in that meeting. She sat outside the door. She did not listen. She had enough respect for both of them to give them that space. But she felt, through the floor, the vibrations of whatever they were doing in there. Long silences, then short bursts of Dravari resonance pulse, which refers to specific sound waves produced by the Dravari, then silence again. When James emerged, his face was very still. He sat down on the floor of the corridor, not against the wall. He took a seat in the middle, sitting cross-legged with his palms down. Lena sat next to him. "Talk to me," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you know about grief that a community holds?" Not individual grief. The kind that lives in a place itself. In the way people move through a space, the sound they make without realizing, and the rhythm of how a group breathes together over years. She thought about it. "I worked with a community in West Virginia after a mine collapse. They'd lost 11 men. The town didn't process it individually. It processed it collectively. There was a quality to how people moved through the streets. There was a sense of weightiness and synchronization in their movements. It seemed as though they were all bearing a common burden and had mastered the art of walking in unison." He nodded. The Orrenti had been carrying something for a very long time. She looked at him. "What do you mean?" The base layer transmission isn't a threat. It isn't a claim. I remain. I pressed both palms harder into the floor. Seb described the Orrenti as the ones who remain. I asked him to tell me more about that. The Dravari have historical records, fragmentary but real, of the region beyond the veil. Something happened there a long time ago. These events occurred well before the era of human space exploration. This occurred well before the Dravari expansion. Anshin. What happened? Something ended. The Orrenti were part of a much larger civilization, a collective that spanned a significant portion of that region. That civilization collapsed. The Orrenti are what survived, the remnant, the fraction that remained when everything else was gone. He paused. They have been alone in that region for what the Dravari records estimate as several thousand years, and they remember everything. That is what Sev meant. They stay where they are because the people they lost are everywhere they go. Lena felt something shift in her chest. The pressure transmission, she said slowly. The weight, the feeling of being watched. They aren't threatening us. They are, he searched for the word, they are mourning at us. That's the only way I can describe it. They encountered a new species, 2 new species here at the station, and they are transmitting the accumulated weight of thousands of years of solitary grief, because that is the only form of introduction they have left. That is what they know how to do. They know how to share the remaining weight. Lena sat with that for a long moment. Then, quietly, they've been alone for thousands of years, and the first thing they did when they found us was tell us how much it has hurt. Yes, and we almost sent weapons. James Osei said nothing. He pressed his palms into the floor. Outside, 317 vessels held their position, and pulsed with something non-aggressive that was, in the precise way that grief is a form of presence, the most honest introduction any civilization had ever offered another. Lena made a decision. She did not consult protocol. She did not wait for authorization from Earth. She was not, in any formal sense, qualified to make the decision she made. She went to the communications room, sat down at the whole vibration array, the system they used to monitor the Orrenti signals, and asked the technician on duty, a quiet woman named Priya Nair, to help her reverse it. You want to transmit? Priya asked. I want to respond. In their frequency? Their method? Yes. Priya looked at her for a long moment. She was 29. She had an engineering mind, precise, careful, and skeptical of improvisation. The base layer transmission had visibly affected her more than any other crew member. She had lost 6 pounds in 5 days. She had barely slept. She had sat in the mess hall that morning with her hands wrapped around a cup of James's honey-sweetened coffee, looking at the formation outside with an expression. Lena recognized the look of someone who was trying very hard to hold something heavy alone. What are you going to transmit? Priya asked. Lena had thought about the issue for the past 6 hours. She had talked to James. She had sat with Sev. She had stood in her cabin with her palms against the wall and felt the Orrenti signal through the hull. I'm going to transmit the station's grief, she said. Priya stared at her. Lena continued, this is the rhythm of 43 people under prolonged stress. This represents the collective biological signature of crew that has endured fear and isolation, yet has continued to function. I want to take every biometric signal from the station, heart rate variation, cortisol rhythms, sleep disruption patterns, the whole way to what the last 5 days have felt like, and send it back to them in their frequency. That's not a military response. No, that's not a diplomatic response either. No, it's a human one. She paused. They told us what it felt like to survive alone for thousands of years. At least we can tell them how we felt for the last 5 days. Despite feeling small and frightened, we persisted in getting up. Priya was quiet. Then she pulled her chair around to the transmitter console. I'll need 2 hours to configure the array, she said. I'll get the biometric data. It took 3 hours in the end. James helped. Sev, when Lena explained what she intended, was quiet for a long time. Then he said, through the interpreter, that he wanted the Dravari crew's biometric patterns included, if the intention was to convey the experience of being present. It should encompass all those present. The final transmission was 4 seconds long. This was not a deliberate decision. It simply turned out that when they compressed everything, every heart rate, every disrupted sleep cycle, Every shared anxious meal in the mess hall. Priya's trembling hands, Marcus's photograph of his dog, Sev's palms press the floor, Dale's careful silences, James's jars of honey, Lena's thumb pressed into her palm, into the Orrenti's frequency and let it run. For seconds was exactly how long it took to say all of it. They transmitted. Then they waited. The Orrenti formation was still for 47 minutes. Lena stood at the observation panel. She did not press her thumb into her palm. She stood with her hands open at her sides. Then the formation pulsed. Not the grief wait, not the pressure transmission. Something different. At first, no one could articulate the feeling that the entire crew was experiencing simultaneously until Marcus Webb, sitting in the mess hall with his hands wrapped around a coffee cup, looked up at the ceiling and quietly said, "Oh, oh." That's what it feels like when someone finally understands you. The Jervari Resonance Array, a device used to analyze and interpret signals, processed a pulse for 11 minutes. Then the interpreter rendered Sev's translation. They say, "You're small and you persist. We were small once. We have been waiting a very long time for something that persists." The story Earth had prepared for this moment was different. Lena found out later, much later, when the reports were declassified and she was asked to give testimony to the Joint Contact Committee, what had been planned in parallel with James Osei's dispatch. She had known about it. It had simply not been communicated, which in bureaucratic terms was considered a meaningfully different thing. There had been a fleet, not enormous, not the kind that annihilates, but real. 12 deep-range vessels, armed, staged at the third relay point, close enough to reach Kero in 40 hours if the signal came. The signal would be generated in the event of an Orrenti attack on the station. Destroyed it. The signal would be activated if the 43 individuals within the station perished. If that happened, the plan was made by serious, experienced people who learned from the long, bloody human tradition of letting something destroy something of yours without consequence. The plan was not genocide. It was not the annihilation of a homeworld, but it was decisive. It was the kind of answer that closes conversations permanently. The fleet had been on standby for 6 days. When Lena learned this, she sat in the committee room in Geneva, which had pristine white walls, a pitcher of water, and the careful faces of the people asking her questions. She felt something unexpected. Not anger or relief, but profound, exhausted gratitude for the 47 minutes of Orrenti silence after transmission. 47 minutes were spent inside the window. The fleet's order specified that if contact broke down, if the Orrenti acted with hostile intent, the signal would go out. But the fleet commander, a woman named Admiral Diane Chu, had held the order. She had read Lena's reports. She had reviewed the acoustic data James had sent in real time. She had sat with a decision for 47 minutes with her hand near the transmitter, and she had not sent the signal. This was due to a profound understanding she had gained, not the Orrenti's grief. She was not struck by the philosophical weight of what Lena was trying to convey. She was a fleet commander. She understood those things the way a surgeon understands weather, relevant, contextual, and not the point. What Diane Chu understood was simpler and harder. If we fire, we will never know what they were trying to say. We will have to live in a universe where we refuse to listen. She had waited, and in those 47 minutes, everything had changed. In the committee room, someone asked, "Do you know about the fleet?" "No," she said. "If you had known, would it have changed your approach?" She thought about it honestly. "It would have frightened me more," she said. "But no, I would have done the same thing." The alternative was to allow two civilizations, both familiar with the pain of enduring loss, to treat each other as threats for the remainder of their existence. She paused. "We almost silenced them. They almost silenced us." The only thing that stopped both outcomes was someone deciding that the other's burden was worth understanding. The committee member across from her wrote something in his notes. Lena looked at the window. Clear sky above Geneva. The ordinary blue of a planet that did not yet fully understand what almost happened, or what had happened instead. 3 months after the transmission, the Orrenti sent a structure through the veil. Not a vessel, not a weapon. It took the Jervari Resonance Team 16 days to fully categorize it, and James Osei had to spend 2 weeks sleeping beside it in the docking bay before he understood what it was. It was a memory object. The Orrenti built them, had been building them for thousands of years, as a form of record keeping. Not written, not audio. The objects were constructed from a material that stored vibrational patterns the way certain crystals store heat, allowing them to transmit sensations directly to the user. Touch the object, and your nervous system receives information. Not language, not imagery, but feeling. Chronological, complex, layered feeling. Touch the object, and your nervous system receives information. Not language, not imagery, but feeling. Chronological, complex, layered feeling. This object embodies a collective, biological, and truthful feelings of a community of beings at specific moments in their history. The object they sent to Kero held 412 such moments. The object, compressed into the size of a large suitcase, contained 4,000 years of Orrenti experience, readable by any sufficiently sensitive nervous system. James spent 2 weeks with it. He emerged from the docking bay on the 14th day, his eyes red and his hands slightly shaking. He sat down across from Lena in the mess hall, where she poured him coffee and added honey, without asking, and they sat in silence for a while. "What's in it?" she asked eventually. He wrapped his hands around the cup. The beginning, what they were before the collapse. He stopped, started again. There were millions of them. They constituted a civilization spanning a vast region. He shook his head. They were not warriors. They were not explorers. They were recordists. Their entire culture was built around the act of witnessing and preserving. Every community had people whose only function was to sit with moments, births, deaths, agreements, arguments, discoveries, and encode the feeling of them, so nothing would be forgotten. And then the collapse. I don't know yet what caused it. The object doesn't contain that. Or if it does, I haven't reached it. What it contains is the after. What it felt like to be the fraction that remained. To be 300 vessels out of millions. To wander a region full of places saturated with people who were gone. He was quiet for a moment. They kept recording. Even after. Especially after. Because that was all they knew how to be. Witnesses. And if they stopped witnessing, there was nothing left. Lena thought about Sev and about the resonance chamber. She remembered his palms resting on the floor. They emerged from the veil, she remarked. When they found us, they were doing what they always do, witnessing. They were taking the measure of a new presence. And then, he paused, the fourth signal. That's the signal I've been attempting to classify. It's in the object. It's a record of the moment they received our transmission. She looked at him. What did it feel like? To them, James was quiet for a long time, outside the observation panel. The veil drifted in its old slow rhythm. The Orrenti formation was still present, still 4 kilometers out, but different. Something in the pulse had changed. Something that did not have a translation, but that the crew had stopped calling pressure and started calling simply company. It felt, James said carefully, like the first day after a very long winter when you step outside, and the air is different and your body knows. Not your mind, your body, that something is about to come back. Lena pressed a thumb into her palm. Then she stopped. She opened her hand. She placed it flat on the table the way Sev placed his palms on the floor. She mimicked the manner in which James had traversed the corridors. The way the Orrenti pressed their signals into the hull of the station full of small, frightened, and persistent people was truly remarkable. She left it there. A year later, the station was renamed. Not by Earth, not by a committee. There was no formal process involved. The crew renamed it themselves informally, the way teams always do important things, quietly, in the mess hall, over terrible coffee, by consensus rather than vote. They kept calling it Kero, but they changed what the word meant. It had meant nothing before. That was the point, a word chosen for its emptiness, because naming things made them easier to mourn. But now Lena wrote the new definition in the station's log, which was technically meant only for official entries, but which the previous 7 station chiefs had also used for personal entries, because some things needed to be said in the record even if no protocol required it. Kero, N. The condition of remaining present in a place after the thing that sent you there is changed or ended. Kero refers to the quality of continuing to bear witness when the alternative is silence. Rather, it is grief. The choice to bear it openly was made. Marcus Webb's dog was also named in the log. Her name was Biscuit. She was 7 years old, and she was waiting in Tulsa because Lena had decided that a log allowing personal entries might as well do so correctly. Sev read the entry through the interpreter and was quiet for a while. Then he said the word in his language, the Dravari word that the translator rendered imperfectly, as the one who keeps returning to the same place because the place still needs him. It was not the same word. It was close enough. The Orrenti sent 2 more memory objects over the following 8 months. The joint Dravari human team was still working through the second phase. The third had not been opened yet. A collective, unspoken decision that some things deserved to be waited for, particularly because the team believed that understanding the full context of the memory objects would enhance their significance. That anticipation was its form of respect. James Osei returned to Earth. He testified before 7 committees, consulted on the new contact framework, and then went back to Cape Town and wrote a paper that the academic community spent 3 years arguing, which eventually changed the foundational assumptions for different scientific fields. He sent Lena a copy. She read it twice. She wrote him a response that took her 6 drafts and said, in the end, simply, "You were right about the honey." Dale Okafor remained station chief for another 2 years. Sarah Voss transferred to the new Deep Range Contact Program, the one built on the Kero principles rather than the old protocols. Priya Nair became the lead developer of the Whole Vibration Communication System, which was eventually adopted by the Dravari as well, and which, in a small, imprecise, beautiful way, meant that for the first time in recorded history, 3 civilizations shared a language none of them had been born with. The fleet Admiral Diane Chu had commanded was quietly stood down 4 months after the transmission. She retired 2 years later. During her retirement ceremony, she delivered a brief unrecorded speech, which Lena learned about from Dale, who was present. The relevant part, as Dale related, was this: "The hardest thing I have ever done in 30 years of command was keep my hand away from a button for 47 minutes. I want you to understand, it was not restraint. Restraint implies fighting an impulse. I was not fighting anything. I was listening. I had been given enough information to understand that listening was the right action. My only regret is that we don't train for that. We train for the button. We need to start training for the 47 minutes." Lena was at Kero when she heard that. She was standing at the observation panel, watching the veil. The Orrenti formation was smaller now. Most of the vessels had returned to the cloud, one by one over several months, back to the region beyond. 12 remained. Witnesses, Lena had decided. Recordists. They did what they had always done. Sat in one place and encoded what it felt like to be there. She placed her palm against the observation panel. The glass was cool. Beneath it, vacuum. Beyond that, the formation pulsing slowly. The pulse was different now. Lena had spent enough time with the bone conduction recordings, enough time with James's framework, and enough time pressing her palms against the walls of the station at 0300 when she couldn't sleep to feel the difference in her body before she understood it in her mind. The old transmission had been heavy, accumulated, unshared, enormous weight. The new transmission was something else. This was a feeling of weight that had been distributed for the first time in 4,000 years. Set down not away from the body but across more bodies. Eased not by forgetting, but by being witnessed. Of SYMJHY. From this moment, "I am mine to carry" was a phrase Lena had used in her first transmission, worked out with James and Sev and encoded into the biometric signal as best they could manage. An assertion not of dominance, not of endurance, but of a very specific human stubbornness. The refusal to let the weight of existence become a reason to stop. The Orrentis had heard it. The 12th vessel pulsed once, slow and low, and Lena felt it in her sternum. She did not have a word for what it said. She decided that was fine. Some communications did not need translation. Some things passed between living beings in a frequency below language, in the rhythm of a shared breath, in the warmth of a palm against a wall, in the simple fact of 2 things remaining together in the same place at the same time. Kero held. The veil drifted, and across 4,000 years of silence, something that had been waiting for a very long time felt, for the first time, the particular and necessary relief of being heard. And